It is a clean industrial deal. We named it evolution or transformation. I will try to explain what I have in mind. The first thing we have, the hearings are over. As there is still some political discussion between parliamentary group, but I would say with high probability we could assume that the commission and its composition will be approved as expected and will start working from 1st of December. So that would mean that by 10th of March or latest mid of March, how you calculate the 100 days, the commission should propose clean deal industrial strategy. So if it is should be proposed, we would need really to understand what could be in it. And it is not such an easy task for Commission really to table it, because it depends the viewpoint you take where you are. Let's take from the asset sides. We have European model of industry that builds on an open economy, a high degree of market regulation and competition. We have very strong legal framework. We also have policies to redistribute wealth. And as a result, we have a good internal market, 440 million customers. If I take accession countries, it could be again over the 500 million customers. So we have 23 million companies. We provide 17% of global GDP. And on income inequality, we are by far better than China or United States are doing. So if you look from this point of view, well, there is a challenges, but we will have now Mercosur deal being approved somewhere in December, most probably. At least there is high probability. And why we would need to change something. And additionally, we also know that we have very high climate ambitions and also social responsibility ambitions. So we introduced new regulations. We have been tougher on carbon prices. So it seems that we are trying to face a very honest, open economy. But there are two challenges coming in. One is definitely geopolitics. We have a definitely strong geopolitical change, I would say, following Fukuyama, that we move from very liberal approach to the world to very, very conservative approach to the world, where Europe, is based on liberal values, definitely has a challenge to adapt. Then we have a war in Europe already for 1,000 days. So we know that during the next American administrations, decisions will be taken more to protect American economy, and that will definitely influence Europe. We also know that China is trying to use all the loopholes where to come to these new technologies into the market and then take over the market. So we have external challenges where Europe needs to adapt to the world. I am not exactly quoting what was said by French President Macron, but he said, well, it's enough to be vegetarian. We need to start also to eat meat. So perhaps he made it more dramatic, but that's you need to change your diets. That's what was suggested. But also, if we felt the last years, even with this geopolitical challenge, we had a problem. So we're starting to lose on competitiveness, and we felt that we are not following any more time approach with innovation. So as a result, in political school, we have two extremes. One extreme, move out of regulation, weaken climate ambitions because others are not doing it. And that is a solution for being competitive and also having efficient industrial policy. The other one saying, no, we need to accumulate wealth, even take a debt, long-term debt, and invest in transformation. So these polarities are always in some type of contradiction and fight. And at the end, Commission in Green Deal, well, need to find a way how to get Europe more together and take the most efficient policy towards it. We have a debate today, and we have fantastic panel. We have Jana Petko from Euroelectric. I think everybody knows Euroelectric. We have Adina Georgescu from Eurometaux. European Non-Ferrous Metal Association. We have Ronnie Belmans from KU Leuven, and my good friend Markus Kerber, who was described as most influential business lobbyist, but that is in the past. He was a former CEO. He was CEO of Bundes BDI, that is Federation of German Industries. So it is really great to have you here. And now for the discussion, I invite my colleague, Professor Jones, to take the floor. Christopher, you are muted.
Thank you very much. So we have the challenge, and anybody who has had the privilege of watching the hearings of the Parliament will certainly have a reflection that, at least based on that, there is no silver bullets or bullets that have been identified by the Commission or the Commissioners designate, or they're not telling us what they are, shall we say. So it would be great if our panelists today could tell us what the silver bullets are. Because the poor Commission officials, as far as I can see it, based on the hearings, have got EVPs and commissioners who identify that the clean industrial deal is important. We need to improve competitiveness. The car industry is important. We're facing challenges, etc. But perhaps I missed it. I didn't get the silver bullets. I didn't get exactly what this commission is going to do. And so we have four great panelists who are going to tell the commission and the poor services who are actually going to have to write this clean industrial deal, where we're all saying, where's the meat? Following Andries's, we can't be vegetarians anymore. And so we have four great panelists who are going to be able to help the commission to say, okay, what are we going to put in this? What is going to shift the needle when we're faced by all these challenges? So I guess we'll go in alphabetical order. So Adina, would you like to take the floor first in order to tell us, okay, what does, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself as well, explain what the areas that you're focusing on are, and tell us what from your industry and also personal approach, what should be in the clean industrial deal?
Thank you so much. Well, I am honored to be here, and it's for me, it's amazing that I am in a panel with two of my former bosses. I worked in the commission. I started working in the commission during the last mandate, the last months of Mr. Piebalg's mandate. So you were still my commissioner for a few months. And Christopher, you were my director and deputy director general at some point in DG Energy. So I'm honored to be here. So I've been doing energy my whole life, and at all level, at national level, in the ministry and in the government in Romania and in the commission, and now I'm working for the private sector. I also work for a corporation for the Romanian aluminium smelter. So I have a patchwork of experience, and I agree with you, Christopher, that it's not an easy task what the Commission has to do right now to accommodate the climate ambitions with the inflation, with the increasing costs of living and doing business in Europe, but also with the more uncertain geopolitical context where we have to operate, and where countries are becoming more and more assertive. So I think, well, energy, obviously, I'm representing the non-ferrous metals industry, which is highly electro-intensive. So we consume massive amounts of electricity. just to give an example, in an aluminum smelter at full capacity, medium capacity represents 4 or 6% of medium member state electricity consumption. So that's valid. That's significant amount of electricity, and therefore electricity prices, obviously energy prices in general, but particularly the electricity prices are extremely important. And this has become very visible during the 2 years ago, during the high energy prices, where we had seen half of the aluminium primary production in Europe being wiped off. And that has continued during the following period of time. And it has also led to, we also have 60% of the silicon capacity that's being shut down in Europe, also half of zinc. So these are metals that are used for the energy transition. They're used in all kinds of applications, from electric vehicles to wind turbines and cables. So on top of what we need to make sure is that we don't, the energy vulnerability and of Europe. I think we are still not in the best shape, while we are still working on securing our energy supply. We have to make sure that we do not add to that another vulnerability, namely the raw materials dependency. And we see that this is already happening for certain metals where Europe is not sufficient, and the closures have led to an additional pressure on the security of metal supply. So we are importing metals with higher carbon footprint, while we have sadly allowed the closure of decarbonized facilities in Europe. So what Europe should do? Well, I think it should start with 2 points. There are 2 levels of approaching competitiveness: fixing, if you want, or bringing back online the existing capacities, the ones that have shut down, preserving the current industrial base, and then move forward, then go to the next, adding additional capacity, adding more projects, fostering investments in the whole, but the approach should be a whole value chain approach as much as possible, so that we don't replace we don't move the dependencies from one part of the value chain to another. So just my first 2 points: preserve the existing base that's still existing in Europe, and then look forward for solutions for the purpose of achieving the critical raw materials targets, and therefore the European resilience when it comes to raw materials. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adina. I mean, there's 2 numbers that you give us which are really worrying. That half the aluminum capacity has been mothballed or eliminated, one or the other, and 60% of the silicon capacity. Is there any particular of all the reasons that one can think of? Energy prices, the ETS. Well, the ETS. Okay, you're electro-intensive, so okay. So the electricity price, taxes, regulation, whatever. What is the real issue that has caused this meltdown?
Meltdown. Well, this meltdown, the biggest. I mean, the deindustrialization of Europe has started years ago, slowly, but the energy crisis 2 years ago has exacerbated that, has added a leap into the closure. So we have seen permanent closures. 2 aluminum smelters have closed permanently, and those were highly efficient smelters. And it's the first reason, particularly since we are electro-intensive, is the electricity cost. So overall prices plus all the elements of the final electricity bill that the metals they have to well to pay for. But beyond that, we also operate on a global market, so we are fighting with competitors that are enjoying different environments from different business conditions. So they have lower electricity costs. They also have easier access to financing. They also have overall less costs of doing business, regulatory costs, and those would entail everything from from environmental costs of doing business in Europe to the cost of accessing capital. So we see that there are basically two schools of thinking: the famous carrot and the stick. So you have the more subsidizing, the incentivizing approach that is, for instance, in US with the Inflation Reduction Act, but also elsewhere. And then we have a different approach over here in Europe, and all the regulatory costs, also the constant changes to legislation and the flurry of legislation, it also adds to making difficult for companies to navigate the regulatory and legal environment, but it also adds to the costs of doing business in Europe. And in certain cases, yes, the costs are coming also from the better life that we have over here in Europe compared to, if we were to work in, I don't know, in Indonesia, for instance. But it is a reality that it is more expensive to do business in Europe. So until we look at the causes and try to find solutions or to tackle, the competitiveness will become a bit. Achieving competitiveness would be a game of moving the problem from one place to another. So first we need to tackle the electricity prices and costs in Europe. We need to speed up the development of new capacities, of new power generation capacities, to offer the industry access to the necessary decarbonized electricity, and hopefully that will lead to more liquidity to lower prices. But we also need to have a look at the overall regulatory costs and to see what can be streamlined, and to see maybe not all of them are necessary, or maybe not all the regulatory burden that is placed on companies is potentially not necessary.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adina. I'll come back to many of these things, but ABCD. Iona, Eurelectric, thanks very much for being with us here today. As we've heard from Adina, one of the key problems is the cost of your product is too expensive. So we're very much looking forward to hear what Eurelectric sees as the key challenges, and what are the solutions in relation to the Clean Industrial Deal. In the hearing, almost every commissioner and EVP said we've got to get energy prices down. And the solution to getting energy prices down was to increase the amount of renewables. That was the only one that I actually identified as a deliverable. So, Iona, we'll be really interested to see what you see as the challenges for the next commission, both in the Clean Industrial Deal and more widely.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here with you. So, as you were mentioning, I work for Eurelectric, where I am a climate and industrial policy advisor. So I'm somewhat fortunate to look at an unfortunate situation in Europe, because from where I stand, I see a continent that is currently at the crossroads. We are a continent that we're trying, or a union that is trying to build up its energy sovereignty, or face the struggle in a global competitiveness. And together with that, the path to a competitive, sustainable, and resilient industrial future demands robust support and a clear vision. And as you were highlighting in the hearings, we lacked insights into what this clear vision will be for the future. And we hope that with this clean industrial deal, we can build something together, something that would give certainty and foresight for our industries, in electro-intensives as well as the power sector, because we are somewhat interconnected industries and we all depend on each other. So we do hope as Eurelectric that a clean industrial deal will complement the Green Deal. So we see these two policies continuing to set the path for the future, but we also understand that energy, climate, and industrial developments need to go hand in hand, and we need all stakeholders, both on the power sector side as well as on industrial side, but also policymakers to reach a consensus and pull in the same direction. And I hear very well what Alina was saying with regards to the energy prices. It is true that during the crisis we have faced an extreme or skyrocketing electricity prices, and we all know that those were caused by a dependency on Russia, on fossil fuel imports. It's also something that we hear very often. It's about energy prices and not necessarily electricity prices. And I think here is the nuance, because okay, if you add more renewables in the power sector, the electricity prices go down. But this doesn't mean all the energy prices are going down. And my 2 cents on that are that we need to increase the electrification rates if we want to lower the energy costs of all electro-intensives. Currently, if we look at the electrification rates across the economy, we know they have stagnated for the past decade at 23%. Specifically in the industry, we see a stagnation at 33%. Our biggest consumer is the aluminium sector. And it's very painful to see that smelters are closing their business in Europe. I think we can say also with a certain degree of confidence that electricity prices at wholesale level are diminishing, are dropping. We have had a peak in 2022 at the peak of the crisis, where they reached on average 227 euros per megawatt hour. But if we look at this year's figures between January and August, we were at 74.8 euros per megawatt hour. So the prices are dropping. We have exited the crisis situation, yet the prices are still double maybe the 2019 levels. So we are working towards reaching that wholesale price that we had prior to COVID. And we should not forget that COVID was also a very difficult situation that triggered closures and reduced the industrial output across Europe. Another important aspect that I think is worth highlighting in this situation is the taxation policy that we have in Europe, and we know that taxes applied to electricity are 1.4 times higher than taxes for gas. So this is not incentivizing consumers to adopt more decarbonized, I would say, because electricity is it's accelerating towards decarbonization. So we really need to see with the new commission developments on the energy taxation directive. This has been, I think, the file that they didn't manage to close in the previous mandate, and it should be closed in this mandate, hopefully with the taxation policy that fairly allocates also the environmental impact of the fuels that are.
Iona, we seem to have frozen, I'm afraid. Perhaps then I'll come back to you once we get you back. Marcus.
I'm sorry, my connection dropped,
okay.
so I don't know where.
We lost you about 20 seconds ago.
So I think I was wrapping up the idea that we hope the ETD is solved with this new commission. And yeah, I was saying maybe one point that I would like to make, and I think it's also it bridges the discussion between industrial consumers and the power sector. I think we both have the need for to know that demand will be there, that our product will be sold. And what we have seen last year and in the previous years, basically, is that the electricity demand is dropping. 50% of the drop in demand between 2021 and 2023 was due to industrial closures or reduced activity. So this is a warning sign for us that we need to do more to keep the industry in Europe. We also need policymakers to understand they need to support the industrial demand, because if you look at investors on our end, unless they know demand will be there, the appetite to invest in new clean capacity is diminishing. So we need to make sure that that all these elements come together in the clean industrial deal.
Many thanks, Iona. I'll come back to a lot of these things. I've just Googled the commercial electricity prices worldwide, and I think it's useful to mention that. So Germany, $0.27 per kilowatt hour. China, 0.09. United States, 0.14. So in the United States, you pay half the cost for your electricity price as a company compared to Germany. And in China, less than a third. So if you are an electro-intensive company, you've got a problem, shall we say, as is reflected. Marcus, thank you very much indeed for being here with us. I think it's probably fair to say that the question of a clean industrial deal is a bit of a focus in Germany at the moment, to put it mildly. And Germany is a little bit the petri dish, the chemical dish of the discussion that Europe is now engaged in, and it's fiercely being considered there. Perhaps I'll simply pass you the floor and ask the question, what should this commission do in order to put us back on a path where the Mittelstand and the rest of German energy actually continues to grow, because we're in a crisis? So the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Christopher. I think, and I was given a side briefing by Andres to be very open and not shy away from rocking the boat. So I will try my very best at fulfilling Andres's expectations. But let me just remind everyone that the GDP of Germany, which is at the moment not growing at all, we're in a recession, full stop. But the GDP of Germany constitutes 29% of the Eurozone GDP and roughly 25% of the EU GDP. So whatever happens in Germany or does not happen in Germany has a a super big effect on the well-being of Europe, something that German governments, I'm afraid I have to say, tended to forget over the last 10 years. In almost everything the German governments did, not just the Scholz government, but also the various Merkel governments. And I had the privy to be 10 years in 3 different Merkel governments. But one thing that one must not forget is what's the composition of your GDP. And not only has Germany got the biggest economy inside the EU system and the Eurozone system, but within that biggest economy, it still has the biggest manufacturing share of it all. And if you're in manufacturing, you need more, by definition. If you're a manufacturing economy as opposed to a service economy, so far, you tended to need more electricity and energy than anyone else, because industry is a more or less energy-consuming activity. Having said that, looking a little bit into the looking glass for the next 10 years, this will change dramatically, because also the service economies, if they are data-driven, if they are AI-driven, if they're data center-driven, they will need enormous amounts of electricity in the next 10, 20, 30 years, more than industrial countries ever needed. But we are at an inflection point at the moment where Europe still is a relatively big industrial continent, but we will move into a service continent. And Germany is probably the pivotal country to demonstrate whether that is easy or whether that's difficult. Now, having said that, and I can add on to what Adina said, 3 years ago with the Ukrainian war, energy prices, which are still twice as high as they were before February 23rd, have hit German economy very, very hard. But it's not just the Ukrainian war. I think the overall guideline that we have to take in finding your famous silver bullet is that Europe and Germany in particular have to make 3 basic admissions. Number one admission, the geopolitical landscape in which the EU and Europe and Germany are operating has changed dramatically and will not be going back to what it used to be before at least another decade. And what is the change in geopolitical? I think the rule-based world is gone. There is no more rule-based world. We're back to the almost Westphalian system of the great power struggle. And as we were sitting around this table for the last 30 minutes, a news flash from the United States came that some of Trump's advisors are thinking about abolishing the Federal Reserve Bank. I mean, this is something that will have fundamental impacts on the world economic system. I'm just saying that there's one player out there who is not causing wars like Mr. Putin, who is not threatening his neighbors like Xi, but who is going to be soon the US president, and he's going to take maybe things out of the US system which have a global impact. So number one, geopolitical world has changed, no more rules-based world. Second of all, as a consequence, we have a huge new dynamism in macroeconomics. Macroeconomics are no longer coordinated around the world. Forget G20, forget G7 and all these things not working any longer. It's a competitive world out there, even in macroeconomics. The US will have a fiscal policy like we've not seen it before, with huge impacts on interest rates and growth and so on. And the third one, and maybe the most controversial one, is we also live in a world where we have to correct some of our assumptions on the energy and climate policy that we've seen. In a world that is no longer rules-based, in a world that has different macroeconomics, I don't think the existing climate and energy policy assumptions are no longer true. I think the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement, which I think had the right goal in limiting the increase in global temperatures, but it was based on vertical regulatory silos, which each for themselves would regulate their area of responsibility, and then we would add it up to a global positive climate picture. It doesn't work any longer. And Adina has mentioned one thing that's very important. We have to start thinking climate policy, CO2 reduction, decarbonization along horizontal value chains. But given the first two changes, change geopolitics, change macroeconomics, that's increasingly difficult for Europe. Because I don't think the US will see eye to eye with us on climate policy, or for better or worse, on anything else, nor will our Asian and Pan-Asian partners, erstwhile partners like Russia and China, play along. So I think we can only, as the EU, see whether we have got help in our neighborhood. And I'm coming back to my colleague from the Electrical Association. Yes, renewables are part of the solution, but I'm sitting here in Berlin, staring out my window, and for the last 10 days, we had neither sunshine nor wind. Hence the megawatt price. The megawatt hour price at the moment is approaching 800 or 900 euros, because there is no renewables electricity production in Germany that is worth mentioning for the last 10 days. So we're importing heavily. And I think if we go forward with more renewables in Europe, and Andries knows what I'm trying to get at, if we go forward with more renewables in our overall European and German power production and power consumption, which is mainly electrical power, then we have to admit that due to geophysical laws of nature, we will move into a new energy setup that is more Mediterranean, that is more North African, that's probably more Saudi Arabian, and it's more Scandinavian and, say, North Great British than ever. There is no way the center of Europe can provide cheap and renewable energies-based electricity on its own. So it needs strategic alliances to make the import of decarbonized, clean, cheap electricity and production of that a prerogative in its energy policy as an add-on to the Green Industrial Deal. And my last point, just to use an example, if we talk about carbon border adjustment mechanism, I think we will have to widen the definition of our borders to go beyond the EU's borders and maybe include Morocco, maybe include Northern Africa, maybe include the Arab Peninsula, because we will soon have large amounts of green energy coming from these areas, if only we let it into the EU and if we become part of that of that value proposition. So to sum it up, the radical changes around the EU will force us to make radical changes within the policy definition framework within the EU. Otherwise, I think our policies are too insular and will not help our national or European industries, and they will all, or most of them, will go in other regions of the world. I think the United States will become a very, very attractive region for industrial companies in not only in Germany, but in Europe overall. And they might go to places like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, you name it, maybe even in the Middle East. So adapt to the world around us, adapt the package of the 55 measures that you have, and become a little bit more courageous in how you define the order in which you want to regulate. That's my view. And Andries, I hope I've rocked the boat enough.
Markus, that was brilliant, true, enlightening, depressing, and upsetting. Which is a reflection of the following question, okay, which we'll get into a bit more in detail. Because if I take everything you've said, okay, I draw the following conclusions, okay, which is something you're not allowed to say in Europe. Question 1. Is therefore a 90% greenhouse gas target for 2040 naive and unrealistic in the light of the geopolitical issues that you just mentioned? Because as you say, the US is not going to be responsible on climate change in the next 5 years, and China and Asia and the rest of the world will follow this lead. Okay, so that's the first question. Should we be more selfish in terms of social, industrial, Number two, you're right, of course, about where we're going to have to get our clean electricity, unless we're going to go nuclear again. Okay, you're absolutely right, of course, that and what I'm sure Ronnie is going to talk about as well is recent developments in terms of the cost of carbon capture and storage mean that gas with CCS in Central Europe, if you want to clearly zero carbon, is going to be also crazy expensive as well. Okay, question mark. Okay, so we are going to need these large scale levels of imported clean renewable electricity, but that ain't going to happen by 2040. That to build the interconnectors to Northern Africa, Greenland, whatever you want, ain't going to happen by 2040. And if you want to import your electrons and hydrogen, then you're back to the crazy expensive again. Okay, so do we need to rethink what we're doing by 2040? Okay, third question. You talk about, sorry, I'm loading a lot on your plate now. Okay, the third question is we're going to become a service economy, right? And what Adina says in particular, and you look at the numbers that I said on electricity. I didn't even talk about the electricity price, commercial electricity price in Qatar, which is less than a tenth of German prices. Okay, but of course, the electricity that you're buying there. Okay, that's fossil fuel related. Okay, so does that mean we should accept that energy intensive and energy cost related industry in Europe is that Elvis is leaving the building, as you say, and we should accept it and create an industrial strategy in the Clean Industrial Deal that accepts that and moves on? So yeah, I'm trying to rock you boat even a little bit more, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as possible because we've got other panelists and one more to come on. But I think some of the core European or Central European energy intensive companies will at least take a look at energy prices in the south of Spain or even in Catalonia. They will take a look at Turkey, and they might take a look at Saudi Arabia, where they're being offered corporate or commercial electricity prices at around 1.5 to 2 euro cents per kilowatt hour, which we can never have in Germany. So some of them will leave, but I'm more worried about the companies of tomorrow, the data-driven companies, of which we will have some in Europe as well. If you want to run a supercomputer, if you want to run a large-scale data center, you will need the same electricity prices. And I'm somewhat skeptical that Moroccan solar and wind produced green electricity, or the same in south of Spain or in Saudi Arabia, will ever go on a grid, because the grid makes it terribly expensive, makes it terribly political. Just look at the situation we have with south of Spain. Spanish cheap electricity cannot cross French territory into Germany. And I don't think that's going to last for at least 10, 15 years, unless Germany takes a minimum amount of French nuclear power. We live in the world of national energy politics still, and nationally regulated things. So I have no silver bullet for the energy intensive companies in Germany. And if they think they need to leave for cheaper electricity prices, having been at the head of the BDI, I would today say, well, then leave, because I cannot offer you a political solution that will give you the energy prices you need without big subsidies, which you have state aid problems in Brussels for the next 10 years. And if the next 2-3 years are important for your survival, then I have to even open the door for you and show you to go somewhere else along your value chain. Should we therefore be questioning the 90% target? I would say not yet, but I would start communicating to the various political audiences in Europe that we may not reach it, and this may not be the end of the world. It's a very tricky political message. But looking at the US election, looking at other European elections, looking at the landscape here in Germany, the average voter in our Western democracies, he only at the moment cares about the security of his job over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. He's worried about inflation. He's worried about cost of living and climate dystopia. The climate Armageddon in his brains has moved way, way back to the furthest corner of his brains. And if we ridicule these voters, if we tell them you're just not smart enough to understand the climate threat, they might say, okay, but between now and 2040, between now and 2050, let me try and vote in a couple of populist parties. And then we have a far bigger problem, because the people that will then come into our governments, they won't even take a look at the 55 measures of the Green Industrial Deal, because take Madame Le Pen, take the AfD in Germany, they will solve the whole European problem in total. The whole Europe, not problem, but the whole European building that we've built, they will shred it. Like Mr. Trump thinks about shredding the Fed. We need to be very, very clear about that. Without economic prosperity and economic security, the Western democracies will just implode. It's whether we academics and intellectuals like it or not. But that's at stake at the moment. So the Green Industrial Deal is not a panacea, nor should it be one, because the biggest national economies of Europe, my country being the number one, we have to come forward with better national policies to make our national populations and our national electorates happier. And then they will support whatever Brussels comes up with. So the Commission, to end, is in a very difficult situation. On the one hand, it wants to be helpful. On the one hand, it wants to bring Europe in a decarbonized way forward. But without Germany, without France, without Spain, without Italy, without Holland, and at the horizon, without the UK, they can't do it.
Many thanks. I'm going to, following in your comments, I'm going to come back so everybody is aware with the following question after Ronnie has spoken. What you said about the 90%, okay, but 90%, okay, you put 90% in the climate law. That means that assuming you put 90% in the climate law, it means that legally speaking, all EU legislation has to be compatible with that 90%. So you have to reform the ETS, okay? And the only way that you can meet 90% is to ensure that by 2040, the ETS is at zero, okay? Industry is at zero, because the 10% greenhouse gas remaining in 2040 will come from agriculture, airplanes, buildings, way more than 10%, but that's another discussion, okay? Which means that the ETS has to be zero, which means that all our industry has to be zero carbon by 2040 or pay infinite ETS costs. Which means that by definition, therefore, we don't have industry. Or you have a CBAM that is so watertight that it prevents anybody coming in with any gram of CO2 in their products, which means that the cost of products are European steel, our European cement, our European fertilizers are crazy. Has a huge effect on the price. But I'll come back to this because this is the logical consequence.
And just one sentence, Christopher. The Commission is following a path quite rightly in what it's doing with the 90%, with the ETS and with the CBAM, that was defined by a majority of European national leaders. So the change within the Commission can only come with a leadership from a group of national governments, or we follow down the line that you've just described. But I'm the first one to sort of give an exculpation to the Commission, because the Commission at the end of the day is executing what the national leaders of Europe wants it to do. And therefore the change has to come from the national level. from Paris, from Berlin, from Rome, from Madrid, from The Hague, from all the rest of the countries.
What you say is, back to my original thing, it's upsetting, because your geopolitical analysis gets you down to this discussion in the ETS, and we all know that in our hearts, the 90% is right and it's dear to our hearts, but it has major consequences on our industry and therefore on our political system. So Ronnie, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to introduce Ronnie for him. Ronnie is one of our professors at the FSR, and whenever we want a dose of reality, we ask Ronnie, because Ronnie is one of the best energy, I'm going to call you an energy and political engineer. I know that phrase makes no sense whatsoever, but for those who know you, it does, because whenever any of the other professors in Florence, like Andries or I, come out with statements like in the past that hydrogen is the way forward, he'll add some very annoying engineering facts that make you challenge your assumptions. And so Ronnie has very kindly agreed to come along and challenge some more of our assumptions of what the clean industrial deal should be based on engineering and physics. So Ronnie, many thanks for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you also the other speakers. I'm surprised. Normally, if you say alphabetic order, you go to Belmans, and I'm the first one. But now you go for the first name, and then I'm the last one. So, which is a bit interesting to notice. When Andries asked me to speak here, I thought I took back to a paper which I'm writing, and maybe not end up in a paper, but I would like to talk to you about an industrial strategy for the EU 27 based on knowledge, energy, and materials. Because the three speakers that went before me were talking about energy, but I think the industry are 3 points. We have energy, we need materials, and we need people, we need knowledge. Marcus clearly said we need knowledge industry, we don't have it, but the 3 are there and will be there. So next slide, please. If we assume that by 2050, which we probably will not, but we'll assume that we reached our targets, everything is electrified, what we can electrify, transport, building heat, industrial heat, and the sources are wind, PV, nuclear, hydro, so totally carbon neutral. We have some green molecules that we defined. We import kerosene, e-kerosene, e-diesel. We import ammonia, we import methanol, and we have other sources, biofuel, biomass. There's enough biomass in Europe to provide all chemical industry with biomass. And do we do the same as today? We need some other investments. So we are there. Next slide, please. We always forget the money we waste today. And that's first thing which I never hear in any discussions, although this is a picture of Eurostat, so it should be known in Brussels. We spend per month 30 billion euros on fossil fuels import to EU 27. So saying that the industry has a problem and Europe has a problem, it may also have a look on what we spend now on that energy, if we could harvest it here. Now, next slide. Marcus was quite hard and harsh on quote-unquote Brussels, but Brussels sometimes also produces things which I'm really scared of as a technician. This is the Net Zero Industry Act. And we have talked a lot about the US today, and shooting from the hip is a very good thing known from cowboy movies, okay? They, with 6 bullets, they shoot 5 horses, 10 Indians, and the rest of the gang. this is not going to happen. We have to make in Europe, and Marcus, I follow you there, we have to make choices. And we have to make an industry policy which is looking through the windshield of the car and not through the rear mirror. Sorry to say, what is happening today and what was happening in the debates in Parliament is how can we protect our industry? How are we going to see that the industry that we have today is going to survive? How are we going to have steel industry here as we do today? How are we going to have car manufacture as we do it today? Forget it. There will be different products. Just to give you two examples, say 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 2000, there was no smartphone, there were no batteries for cars, there were several things which were not there. So in 25 years, we will see other products, we will see other things, and we are not preparing by just looking in that rear mirror and with CBAM and other things, trying to protect what we have. I'm not going to say that we have to throw away our old clothes before we have new ones, but please look at the next things. So next slide, please. What could we imagine in the field that I'm in? I'm not talking about medics, I'm not talking about IT. What could we imagine that we grew winners on by 2050? We are extremely good in energy systems and related industry. We have top companies and we fragment them. We should bring a one big conglomerate that can have a global competitor in this future-oriented industry. In our energy-intensive industry, we have to look at it very carefully. Can we biomass the chemical industry? I'm not going to say by tomorrow, but we have in Europe, if you do the calculations, we have enough biomass to supply our chemical industry if we, for instance, do no longer use wood for burning in heating houses. On materials, we might do some small mining, but we should be top of the world in recycling. Every atom that comes in should be recycled, reused in new products and advanced products. My dear colleagues around the table here, can you imagine that we have, with the same battery that we have in a car that we buy now in China, we can drive 3 cars in 10 years because the efficiency of the battery production will be, or the batteries will be much higher. And can we do it? Yes, we did it. Have a look at Airbus. So Europe can do it if it wants to. Next slide, please. A bit more about power engineering. All the big, and it was said already by I think the second speaker, we have the top industry on industrial heat, low and high temperature. We are top in HVDC cables, flexibility and the whole stuff. We are top in wind and offshore wind. And we are top in comfort in buildings, which is crucial for the IT future industry. And we might have a look, but that's a political decision, on nuclear industry. So pick some winners. Next slide, please. Energy intensive industry, look at bio-based. Look at recycling and importing sponge iron. It will be much more different. We will only do the high added value things here, but doing the base things where you need massive amount of energy probably won't be here anymore. Next slide, please. And we will need circularity. So I'm looking forward, next slide, please. And last slide. I'm looking forward to how do we get to an industry which is coherent with our material and energy resources. So we did the first industrial revolution in Europe based on coal and iron ore. We did the second one based on electricity and information. we'd have to do the third one based on carbon neutrality and materials that are recycled. So don't think that things will be the same. The fundamental basis being energy and materials are different. So live to that and look to the future where it should be. And it has to be, as I said, carbon neutral electricity system, carbon neutral molecules, which will be important, and strategic resources for materials. And as an end of that, if people are telling me, last week was in discussion, yes, but we have to import lithium, cobalt, etc., etc. It's a major difference. We do not import continuous flows anymore. We import materials that can be reused. So how to prepare for that industry, how to make that transition. So in every policy that the Commission should start now, should be within that framework. Is it contributing to make Europe fit in 20 years for this type of industry? And not for an industry which needs a continuous outflux of 30 billion per month to stay alive. That's my humble contribution, Christopher. And if Marcus thinks he screwed it up, I probably improved what he did and put more questions on the table. But there is a solution. It's not going to be easy, but I think Marcus is quite coherent with what you're saying. Look at ourselves. What are our strengths? Knowing our weaknesses and prepare for something that can be top in a global competition, and don't organize the competition between ABB and Siemens and other competitors in Europe, but let us make some very interesting, nice global competitors based on our shortage of primary material, based on our shortage of fuels ourselves, but having knowledge and having good people and having a system which is working.
Okay, I've got one fundamental question that I would like to ask all the panelists, and after you've answered that question, we'll be out of time. But Marcus, you've got your hand up, so before I ask that fundamental question, I'll pass you the floor.
No, I just wanted to support Ronnie wholeheartedly in his positive vision to my negative analysis by asking myself, is the German government, and I'm always looking at Europe through the spectacles of Berlin, is the German government, the existing one and the future one, aware that in Spain, in Extremadura, in Andalusia, we have enough space together with Morocco to produce enough green molecules to power most of Europe's industry? And if one is aware of that, it's quite logical what needs to be done in Berlin and in Madrid and consequently in Brussels. But I think at the moment we're still having too much of nationalist spectacles on our noses, and we don't see the potential that not just in biomass that Europe has, but what I was trying to say is, because the national governments do not see the various cross-border advantages we have, they limit the room for solutions for the Commission, and this has to end. This has to end.
Okay. Ronnie, first of all, thank you very much for that really rather brilliant analysis. As always, you managed to take away a lot of the noise and dial down to the real issues. So the question is the following, and it's going to take a bit of time to get there. In your comments today, you have challenged the existing political establishment and said you have to do something completely different than what you've been doing in the past. The old rule-based economy, the old hopeful that the Chinese will play by the fair rules. I was in Thailand 4 days ago and I saw adverts for 9 different electric car companies from China. Okay, you think you've got some today? Wow. Okay. And okay, So what is the traditional, what you've challenged today? Okay. What is the additional approach to what should be the industrial clean deal? And what's in the mind of commissioners and EVPs? Okay. So I divide that into a number of areas which are challenging enough politically to try and take these decisions. So what are the costs? What are the problems, if you want to call that, with the clean deal and the industrial competitiveness, and what Marcus says the potential effect on people in reality who are worried about their job security, their pay packet, the electricity bills, and now climate is slightly further away. Okay, so the energy cost per se. Okay, so I've got 4 areas where it's traditional that what the Commission is thinking we should do. Okay, the energy cost per se, i.e. the fact that we don't actually have any natural gas, so we pay higher prices. Okay, taxes, number 2. So what should we do on energy prices per se? And there's not much you can do apart from what Marcus has said and what Ronnie has said and what Iona has said, what Adina has said, in terms of trying to get your molecules from your electrons, directly or indirectly, either in form of electrons or molecules, from places around Europe, from cheap places. Okay, but the traditional thinking of what you do about that is do a policy paper. Okay, but we'll get to the other side, which is that you actually need some fundamental changes. Okay, the existing model. Then there's taxes. There is ESG related taxes, the ETS and CBAM. But as Marcus has said, with a 90% target, that you're accepting a 90% target means ETS charges that are going to be crazily expensive by 2030, by 2040. You can't do it another way. And then there's the issue of general electricity and other taxes, because I think it was Iona, no, it might be Adina, who mentioned that the energy taxes in Europe were 1.4 times the energy taxes anywhere else, for example. And then the specific costs of EU regulation. So in the hearings, a lot of the commissioners talked about simplification, etc., etc. Okay. But on the other hand, they said simplification, but they said, okay, we are going to keep the 2035 regulation on cars. Okay. Let me show you a graph of what EU companies are going to have to report on under the CSDDD directive. Okay. So you're going to have to report on these for yourself, your suppliers, and your suppliers. Okay. I've had discussions with people who have pointed out that some companies are trying to limit their activities in Europe so they don't actually fall under this CSDDD. I'm not saying it's wrong. Okay. I'm not saying it's wrong. These are all valid things that companies should be done. But I know for a fact that some companies are thinking the question, how can we avoid this? Okay. There's other European legislation on packaging, on chemicals, on circular economies that put costs on things. And then there's the issue of fair or unfair competition with China. Obviously, unfair is in relation to dumping steel, for example, although I'm making assumptions there that are unwarranted, of course, without the necessary details. And so the traditional commission response is say, okay, let's look at these and do some policy papers, but not really address them. Because even Marcus, you said, oh, we'll keep the 90% and we won't therefore really deal with the ETS costs. We'll accept that it goes too high. So that's one side, okay? So the question in relation to this, what I do, the traditional package of what the Commission might be doing is, A, what should the Commission do on these elements, which were identified in the hearings and von der Leyen's political guidelines, and will the Commission have the courage to actually do anything that makes a difference? rather than just writing policy papers. Okay, that's one. But what has been identified today, in many respects, is that this traditional thinking isn't really compatible with what Europe needs in order to deal with the new political reality of a non-rules-based world. The WTO is gone, quite simply, etc., of taking strategic decisions, repeating Airbus in other areas, changing the electricity market design completely. Marcus, you've suggested completely changing the electricity market design, which is saying, okay, renewables are really cheap in Spain, so we'll enable European industry to tap into those low-cost renewables. But sorry, if I'm going to be lucky enough to get a onshore wind license in southern Spain, I'm not going to sell it to your industry at cents on the euro per kilowatt hour. I'm going to sell it into the electricity wholesale price at 10 times that. Okay, sorry. Okay, so you're asking us to rip up the electricity market design and rethink everything completely. Okay, so these are the two sides of the coin. One is, let's keep on the traditional path and mess around a bit with the things, but keep the fundamentals. And the other is, rip up the whole damn thing and start thinking truly strategically. That's what you're suggesting. Okay, and there again, the Commission, the question is the Commission going to do this, and are we equipped to do this at European level? And if not, what should happen? So those are crazily ambitious questions and really tricky ones, and I apologize for dumping them on you, but I'd be really interested to hear what you have, and perhaps we'll go in the same order that we did the original questions, and you basically got sort of 4 or 5 minutes each to ask a question that requires at least a 2-hour answer. So Adina, I'm going to start with you, if I may. And it's nice to see you again, by the way.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. These are not easy questions, of course. And well, I'm obviously speaking here on behalf of of the non-ferrous metals industry, so I would have to stay within the mandate that's given to me. But I will start with CBAM, because CBAM is has been has not really been discussed here today, and it has been sold as that half silver bullet, almost being close to a silver bullet, that's going to sort out let's say this deficit of of competitiveness between the European industry that is facing carbon cost as opposed to others that don't. So, but CBAM in itself is vulnerable to circumvention. The way it is being built is basically relying on the honesty of the companies, and basically on the honesty of competitors outside Europe of reporting the exact the emission that their products contain. So since everybody is competing on the same market, it's basically a it's basically a cutthroat situation in the business, and those that are active in the business sector, they know what I'm talking about. So relying on the honesty of the companies outside Europe to actually report the actual data, I think that's a bit of naivete. There are no requirements because the Europe doesn't have jurisdiction to set requirements for verifiers to go and inspect the plants that are reporting set data. So I think this is one of the biggest vulnerabilities of CBAM. So until it is being made, it is improved, it is made watertight, it will actually not deliver the objectives that it has been created for, and that would be providing carbon leakage measures and reducing global emissions, because closing down, leading to a loss of competitiveness in Europe, would actually not deliver the global emission reductions that it's aimed for. So, and the benchmark of the success of CBAM should be the achievement of these two objectives. So, and then also, I heard what you said about the WTO, that WTO has been there in a very I don't know, hanging by a lifeline, if you want, or in basically in a bad situation for many years. And I think we can't rely anymore on WTO to actually deliver the level in WTO, the way it is right now, the way it exists, to deliver the level of protection that we need. So I think Europe needs to acknowledge that, as you said, there are changes at geopolitical level, at the multi-institutional level across the globe, but we also need to acknowledge the security deficit, the security threat that we have in Europe, which is something new that we didn't have it a couple of years ago. So we also need to incorporate that in our policies. And I think in terms of CBAM, it makes sense. CBAM could work for certain less complex, potentially could work for less complex value chains. But for aluminium, for instance, which is a highly complex value chain, CBAM we are very skeptical that it would actually deliver the level of protection that is supposed to deliver. So that is something that needs to be fixed, and starting the new commission would have to start with finding some kind of export solution. Right now, the European exports are at threat because their costs would be are increased, caused by the phase out of the free allocation. So that is the first thing that the commission has to work on if they're serious about also making CBAM work. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on CBAM. And then moving on to the overall energy costs in Europe. So we have the prices and then you have the costs. So to lower the cost, you can also tackle the taxes and levies. And this is something that Joanna touched upon, and this is something that we're also looking into. Also, the different components of the energy costs, they have to be analyzed, and because everything that is being invested, all the developments to the grid and everything has to be paid by someone, so that would be finally reflected in the final energy cost that everyone pays. So if we have to analyze these components, and for electro-intensive industries that are exposed to the global market and to international competition, there would have to be additional reductions from various surcharges or taxes and levies in a soft measure to bring down the costs without challenging the organization of the internal energy market. When it comes to access to renewable electricity or to electricity in general, we see a potential for power purchase agreements, but we also see that companies don't use this because of the price, but also because of in many countries there are national barriers. There's also the mentality, so we need to work on this. But there's also the issue of the credit risk that companies have when going into these power purchase agreements. So some kind of a measure, a guarantee scheme that would tackle the risk of takers, the credit risk of takers, that would reduce the overall cost of the power purchase agreements and would improve access to electricity. Then I think what we haven't talked about is access to renewable electricity, which is we would like to consume it. We're baseload consumers, but then we have to basically we have to adapt to the variable profile production of renewables. So that entails an additional cost. So this, matching of the different profiles has to be tackled. That would also help bringing down the final cost of the renewable electricity and would encourage would help electro-intensive access this potential. So there are solutions, but there's no one simple solution. And I agree with everyone that we have to be creative, but more importantly, we have to get out of the dogmatism. There's a lot of dogmatism and a lot of planning in Europe. This is good, this is bad. There's a temptation to label. And in this current world, and I'm Romanian, so we are close to the war in Ukraine. And we're also, and this is something that should be a concern for everyone. The fact that after so many years we have another war in Europe, and this should actually shift the paradigm and at how we're looking at what we are doing. And security of all kinds should be embedded in the policy. So I think I touched upon, more or less all of the issues.
Thank you very much indeed, Adina. That was terrific. Thank you so much indeed. Iona, electricity.
There are millions of things that I would like to say, but I'll try to stay on a point and be concise. I do believe that trade cooperation has proven essential for Europe, but as I share Marcus's thoughts that the rule-based order has changed, that we are facing a lot of new geopolitical conditions that push us to rethink our international strategy and trade cooperation. However, as Europe is shifting its internal approach to trade, to industry, we need to be mindful that having trade barriers can also have negative spillover effects across the economy, and one of them would be the increased cost for consumers. Now, for instance, you add trade barriers and tariffs on imported renewable energy components. This can raise the costs of deploying these technologies in Europe, and I'm afraid that we can reach a situation where the power sector is squeezed between increased standards, to buy European, to use products that we agreed here have a higher cost than the ones that we import from abroad, which ultimately, so we will have the standards, leading to more expensive electricity, and also requests from our consumers, and these are fair requests, to provide affordable electricity. So we are entering into a dynamic where it will be quite hard to square the circle between standards and demand for affordability. So this is one of the issues that we see if we move towards a more protectionist international policy. Then another aspect that I think it's really important for us, it's not to overhaul everything that was good and that was achieved in Europe. We do believe that we need to implement all the policies that have been agreed so far. This implementation is key for stability, for investment certainty. I cannot foresee an investment framework in which every 5 years we make tabula rasa and we start from the beginning. This is not good for business in Europe, and I think this is one of the competitive advantages that we had compared to other countries. It is expensive to do business in Europe, but you have a stability that you do not have elsewhere across the board. So I think it will be key to implement the electricity market design. This will preserve the functioning of the internal electricity markets. providing appropriate short-term price signals for consumers, but also long-term investment signals. So this is one of the elements that I think it's important to keep in mind. Something that was not mentioned, and I would like to come back to your reference with regards to the prices in the US versus Germany versus China. In the US, there are no taxes on electricity, so basically the industrials are paying the wholesale price, which in Europe the situation is different. But we also have areas in Europe where the wholesale electricity price is competitive and it's on par with the US price. What we need here, and this circles back to some other points that were raised, is more interconnection. We need more grids. We need to make sure that the electricity can flow from areas where the production is plentiful and arrives in areas where the supply of electricity is scarce, and at the moment, I think the electricity market is not sufficiently integrated to enable this transformation. So this transition, I would say, of electricity. So I think this is a key element that would help secure or affordable electricity prices. Another aspect that would be important is, and this circles to what Alina was mentioning, was the long-term contracts, so PPAs, and that would provide consumers with, I would say, more certainty on the price for a longer term. So this would reduce the exposure to the market volatility. If we look at the current situation, we know that there are areas in Europe where prices have gone into the negative very often. And increasingly, the occurrence of hours of negative prices is increasing across Europe. So this is not incentivizing investors to do investments in those areas anymore, because they have to pay the consumers to use their electricity or otherwise curtail the clean electricity. So what we need to see more going forward is flexibility in the demand. And I understand most industrials have a base load, and their ability to be flexible, it's quite limited. But I think any tiny percentage of flexibility that can be offered to the system is valuable. So I think also innovation in this area of how to ensure that processes that we have enable flexibility would be essential to ensure that the power sector can balance this hours and actually make full benefit of clean electricity. So I think this answers some of your questions.
That's quite a shopping list.
Yeah.
Extremely helpful one. Marcus.
Yeah, just very briefly, a slight addition to Yona. Prices are signals, and I think if we have negative electricity prices, it just shows that where these negative electricity prices occur, we do not have enough demand. And it's exactly the point that I'm trying to make to my own government and to people in Brussels. In areas with consistent negative electricity prices, i.e. an overproduction of electricity, that's where we should produce green hydrogen, because the input in creating green hydrogen has so far been curtailed because electricity input prices were too high. And therefore, these are price signals. In areas with negative prices, such on the Iberian Peninsula, put your European green hydrogen production there, and prices will pay back, because hydrogen is very expensive in the end on the consumer side, but it will be taken off. Brings me to briefly your points that you've raised, Christopher. Energy prices, how do we bring them down? And Adina is so right, we have to de-dogmatize. German government wasted at least 10 years in a typical ideological German battle of whether it's better to rely on electrons or whether it's better to rely on molecules. And the average intelligence tells you, why don't you do both? It's much better. It's less risky. So we finally now have an approach in Germany where we not only foster the investment into electrons, but also into molecules. This attitude, put the dogma away and implement whatever works for your goal, is the thing that we should establish. Brings me to taxes. Of course, we should bring the tax burden on everything that is decarbonized energy down. If your primary energy or your secondary energy use is a stated decarbonized one, take the taxes away. That's how you bring the investment flows to where they need to go. And this would also indirectly regulate your regulation. And my main point is the biggest dogma in Europe and in Germany was that growth is bad. I think growth is fantastic. And growth will be happening for the next 20 or 30 years globally, because we will go from 8 to 10 billion people globally. And these 2 billion more people, they all will have smartphones, computers, cars, everything. So growth will be there. But Europe has to develop a growth formula in which climate policy and decarbonization is not seen as a necessary burden that you have to carry. No, decarbonization is a huge business. Carbon capture and storage, carbon withdrawal, nuclear fusion, hydrogen production, grids, super efficient grids, and so on, battery technologies, all the things that Ronnie has listed, they need to be done and they need to be exported around the world. So we need to think whether decarbonization should be labeled more like the new business model for Europe and export into the world, rather than a necessary burden that people somehow try to evade. You push it from one national economy to the other in Europe. No, decarbonization is the way the globe will go. Hence the Chinese efforts to bring down the European automotive industry. My final comment, I think China is in a very weak position, not in a strong position. If Xi Jinping could have another option, he wouldn't flood the world markets. But what's his home situation? He's got 22% youth unemployment. He's got a stagnant population. Population in China is going down now from 1.3 billion people to 700 million by the end of the century. This is not my numbers. This is official Chinese numbers. So this guy has a huge growth problem. And exporting is the thing he thinks will save him. So having started in a more apocalyptic way, I think Europe should try over the next 10 years to see decarbonization as a growth model, become strong in decarbonization, and then bring the other reluctant great powers back to the table and have a coordinated global decarbonization policy, which will be for the better of Europe, for the better of my national elections here in Germany. And of course, I think it will be good for global public goods. But decarbonization is the way, and it's our growth model, and we need to invest. And I'm glad we don't have enough time, because you want to torture me about the German debt brake. We do that in another session.
That was what I was wishing we had time to do, amongst other things. But thank you very much indeed, Marcus. Ronnie?
I have -3 minutes on the timetable. So make it very clear, I'm not going to debate hydrogen, yes or no. Hydrogen is inefficient, so let's electrify, and electrify. And let's show that the world that we are good at several things, and let's go for those things and not try to eat in one meal all the menu of 3 2-star Michelin restaurants. We can't do that. We have to choose our battles, and we have to choose where we are good at. And if we don't do that, we will not be on the map in 25 years. And those things have to be carbon neutral. And I love the idea. And Christopher, I want to give you one small comment on the numbers you cited. It's very irrelevant to use megawatt hour prices as a comparison, because you have the grid costs that come add to that. So it's very difficult to use electricity cost is not the commodity price at all. So we have to be very careful on that, comparing that. And I know that let us try to know where is our knowledge, how can we recycle the materials, and going to Adina, please, maybe we lose the primary aluminium smelters, but we might be the center of the world in recycling aluminium. I'm living in a place called Duffel, which has one of the most large aluminium production in Europe. So I know what aluminium is, recycle it, and there we are good at. We have knowledge, and we have the possibility to have an extremely high value electrical system. So let's go for it and then do the rest. And not turn our attention to the last 5% in 2045, which are a few molecules. Let's do now for the next 10 years electrification, and if that is done, start the next page on electrification. And then we will see where we end up, and we will see what industry we are really good at, pick our battles, and that should be the message to the Commission from my point of view. An industrial strategy is a targeted strategy based on materials, energy, and knowledge.
Many thanks, Ronnie. I'm going to pass to Andries to finalize. I wish we had another couple of hours to go into this in more detail. I'd just like to say that from my point, I'm going to rephrase my original thing, that the comments were brilliant, true, enlightening, depressing, upsetting, but also inspiring and giving some areas for hope. So Andries, I'll pass to you.
Yeah, I would stay with the word inspiring, because it's always true that you need to look on things. If I would be asked to organize to how to prepare this clean industrial deal paper or strategy, I would go in stages. In the first stage, I would go with very simple paper that purpose is where Malkus said that it should be national governments that owns this idea as well. Because it can't be only Brussels centers or Berlin center. It should be commonly centered. It's a huge challenge, but normally we never do it. Brussels does its job, Berlin it does its job, then we look how treaty works, and then it's half measure. It does not necessarily work to the scale. I would mention very small but good example. We will have now full scale synchronization of Baltic countries to the electricity market. It happened only because governments have had the same vision as a commission, and commission helped overcome the hurdles to come together and make this Baltic energy market interconnection. It's a simple task. I do agree it's not comparable, but the logic is there. Government shared the same objective as Brussels, and they continue to work on it. So it is doable, at least on a small example. So the idea would be very small paper that really would try to look on the eyes not only from Brussels, but also Berlin, Paris, Madrid, Rome, just really trying to capture the main things. Then I would stick to the three main areas. One is we need really to share geopolitical vision. I think there was rather united that rules-based world has moved away for a very uncertain time. And it's completely different world we are living. And in addition with the war, we basically have a situation where liberal democracies and Europe's, it's not only Europe's achievement, but also a source of wealth are under threat. So from this, you need to make different consequences, and you need to look on the things that you have done even a year ago with different viewpoint, and should not be afraid to change things. I would suggest also some geopolitical challenges, like go fast for enlargement. I calculated it's 60 million consumers and more materials in the market. That will help. We should not necessarily go all the stages then until these countries comes into the EU. The same with North Africa or with Middle East. It's close. They have also their problems. You can find easy way how to deal in this world. So, but there could be some other things. But I think that need to be understood, that we need to do not. I think Ronnie said we should drive looking in front window, not in the rear window. So I think that's That's how I would say. And related to this is the resilience issue, because definitely I would like to live in Latvia, which is not invaded. We have share a border, and it means that we need to have capacities to defend us and also to have military industry and supply industry to support it. I know it costs money, yeah, true, but it should be very much related. And this state aid that would be requested or military, it should be done, because otherwise, well, I would need to move somewhere. So I don't want to do this. And yeah. So that, I think, is one block. The second is the electricity thing, because it's really worrying that electricity demand is not growing. We are stagnating with the figure. Taxation does not reflect what we try to achieve, and where the biggest achievement on efficiency and security could be made. I would go on this blog because it requests also what Christopher mentioned after Marcus' intervention, electricity market design, not in a sense marginal costs, but how you invest and how you transport need to be dealt completely differently, because you can't just make improvement. You need to change it fundamentally, and you need also to reflect on taxation. So it's not many things, but there are a couple of things that we need to agree how to do it. Then I would go, but perhaps I have not so much knowledge, service economy. At least in my part of the world, we don't discuss it too much. And I understand what it is require, but there could be some things that we really need to think in advance, not when they are coming on it. And last but not least, to look on the issues that we have heard today. Why investment costs in Europe are higher than in by competitors? I would assume that we are very rich. We could invest easier, and also regulatory costs. Or to do it very simple, I commit that by European regulation, we will cut 25% of regulatory costs. Where do we find? It's Commission's problem. So we will find a way where to cut it, and we will ask Elon Musk to help us. So the last part was joke. Yeah, so we don't take but we will make arrangement, because my compatriot is actually responsible for it. Give him tools, give him tasks, or not in the number of directives to be changed, but regulatory burden, how much it will be decreased, and then he will go to the depths. So that also could be done in a way. So that to kept it. The debate was much broader, but I hope it was very interesting also to participants, and I would like to thank Joanna, Adina, Ronnie, and Marcus for using your time. I liked it immensely. I saw Christopher was also very excited. I hope also our participants that heard this debate and also live streaming has followed it. And I will definitely look again for live streaming, because it helps enormously to understand all these issues that you mentioned, really to advance and to make some decent proposals that could be taken on the by the Commission or by European decision makers. And with this, I would like to thank all. We have overrun the time, and much appreciated for your participation.
Thank you again, everybody. Bye
Thank
now.
you.